It was a Tuesday morning in October when my daughter-in-law's father looked me in the eye across the dinner table and told me my son wasn't good enough to carry his family's name. He didn't whisper it. He didn't wait until I'd left the room. He said it with the same casual confidence a man uses when he's never once been wrong about anything, or at least never been told he was. I set down my fork. I looked at him, and I smiled. That was the part that confused everyone. My name is Arthur Bergeron. I am 67 years old. I was born in Sudbury, Ontario. Grew up speaking half French and half English and all stubbornness, and I spent 31 years building a civil engineering consultancy that now operates in 4 provinces. I drive a 12-year-old truck because I like it. I wear flannels because they're comfortable. And I have never once felt the need to tell a room full of people how much I'm worth. Because the people who matter already know, and the people who don't matter, well, that's the point, isn't it? My son Liam married Stephanie 3 years ago. The wedding was beautiful. Liam was nervous in the way. Good men are nervous. Not about the commitment, but about the responsibility of it. He wanted to get it right. He'd been wanting to get things right his entire life, which is something I gave him, and something I am not ashamed of. Stephanie is a kind woman. I want to say that clearly, because this story is not about her. She loves my son genuinely, and she has been patient in ways that, frankly, would have broken a lesser person. What happened was not her doing. What happened was her father, and the particular kind of arrogance that grows in men who had money long enough to mistake it for character. His name is Clifford Hart. He owns a commercial real estate portfolio across the Greater Toronto area, office parks mostly, some retail plazas, a few industrial leases out in Brampton. He made his money the way a lot of men made theirs in Ontario in the 90s. Right place, right time, provincial infrastructure boom, and enough nerve to borrow heavily when borrowing was cheap. I don't begrudge him any of that. I've done the same. But somewhere along the way, Clifford confused being lucky with being superior, and that is a confusion that tends to end badly. Liam had been working at Clifford's company for 14 months when it happened. Property management, operations side. He was good at it. Liam is organized, thorough, the kind of person who catches problems 3 steps before they become problems. And I think that's exactly what threatened Clifford. He didn't want someone competent. He wanted someone grateful. The dinner was at their house in Oakville, one of those large custom builds on a ravine lot, the kind where every surface is imported and nothing is quite comfortable. Clifford's wife, Renata, had made a beautiful meal. There were 8 of us around the table. Clifford and Renata, their younger son Bradley, Stephanie, Liam, my son's best friend who was visiting from Vancouver, myself and my daughter Claire who'd driven down from Barrie for the weekend. We were halfway through the main course when Clifford started. It began as what I can only describe as a performance. A comment about the neighborhood, about property values, about what it meant to come from somewhere versus to simply arrive there. He was looking at Liam and he said it. Liam kept eating. I watched my son's jaw tighten. In that way, it has since he was 9 years old. And someone said something he knew was wrong but wasn't sure he was allowed to correct. I know that jaw. I built that jaw. And I know what it costs him to keep it still. Clifford poured more wine. Good wine. He always made sure you noticed the label, and he said it then. He said that in his family they took lineage seriously. That Stephanie had grown up understanding the weight of a name. That he wasn't sure my son, with his background, fully appreciated what he was marrying into. Background. I took a slow breath through my nose. Claire looked at me from across the table. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's instincts, and her mother has been gone 11 years now. But I could still read what my daughter was telling me, don't. Not yet. So I smiled at Clifford instead. And I said, that's an interesting way to think about family. He took that as agreement. Men like Clifford usually do. What Clifford did not know, what none of them knew, because I have never seen the point in announcing myself, was that 6 weeks earlier, I had received a call from a colleague in commercial real estate. A man I'd done work with in Hamilton, a structural assessor named Borg who I'd trusted for 20 years. He'd been brought in to evaluate a portfolio that was being quietly shopped around. The seller needed to move quickly. There were, according to Borg, some irregularities in the maintenance records of several properties that were starting to attract attention from the city. The seller was motivated. The portfolio was Clifford Hart's. Not all of it. The retail side. 7 plazas, 3 of them with anchor tenants that were already in arrears, 2 of them flagged by the city of Mississauga for deferred structural repairs that were now approaching bylaw violation territory. Clifford had been managing the deterioration quietly for 2 years, rolling the costs forward, betting that values would hold long enough for him to refinance and cover the gap. But the interest rate environment had not cooperated, and now he was carrying debt service he couldn't sustain, and the city notices were becoming harder to ignore. Burke brought it to me because he knew I understood the structural side, and because he knew I had the liquidity to move without needing financing approval. He also knew because I told him some months before, over coffee in a Tim Hortons in Hamilton, that my son was working for the man who owned it. I spent 4 days doing my own due diligence. I hired a separate assessor, a woman out of Waterloo who owed me nothing and had no stake in the outcome. Her report confirmed both. The properties had issues, but they were manageable with proper capital and a realistic remediation plan. The price Clifford needed reflected none of that. He was asking based on pre-rate increase valuations, but there was room to negotiate. And Clifford, I had come to understand, was not in a position to walk away from a teen offer. I made the offer through a numbered company. Standard practice. Nothing unusual. Clifford accepted within 72 hours. He did not know who he was selling to. He knew the numbered company, knew that it had the financing in order, knew that the offer was conditional on a final site inspection that came back clean enough to proceed. He did not know that the sole director of that numbered company was a 67-year-old man from Sudbury, who drove a 12-year-old truck and wore flannels and had just been told his bloodline wasn't good enough. The deal closed on a Friday, quietly. The way good deals close. The following Monday, Liam came home to find a letter on the passenger seat of his car. It had been left there by Bradley, Clifford's son, who had apparently done it at his father's direction. The letter informed Liam that his position was being eliminated due to a restructuring of the operations division. There was a standard severance offer, 8 weeks, the minimum under Ontario's Employment Standards Act, and a request that he return his access card by end of day. 8 weeks for 40 months of work for a son-in-law who'd reorganized their entire maintenance ticketing system and saved them roughly $40,000 in contractor overruns. 8 weeks and a note on a car seat. Liam called me from the parking lot. He wasn't crying. My son doesn't cry easily, which is both a strength and something I worry about sometimes. He was just quiet. That particular quiet that means he's holding something very heavy and trying to figure out where to set it down. I told him to drive to my place. I told him not to respond to the letter yet. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Dominique Arsenault, and she has worked with me for 16 years, and there is no situation I've ever brought to her that she has not handled with both precision and a certain quiet relish that I find deeply reassuring. I explained the situation. She asked 3 terrifying questions. Then she said, "Give me 24 hours." What Dominique established in those 24 hours was straightforward but significant. Liam's termination, given the timing and the circumstances, a son-in-law dismissed with minimum notice, no performance documentation, no legitimate restructuring rationale, created real exposure under Ontario's wrongful dismissal provisions. A claim for reasonable notice at common law, given Liam's specialized role and the manner of dismissal, could reasonably reach 6 to 8 months. There was also the matter of the maintenance records Liam had flagged internally, twice in writing, which Clifford had ignored. Dominic was of the view that a tribunal would take a dim view of a dismissal that followed a pattern of documented good faith reporting. That was the first call. The second call I made was to the property manager I'd retained through the numbered company, now my company, who was already scheduled to meet with the existing site supervisors that week for a transition review. I asked him to ensure that the documentation of deferred maintenance items was thorough and current. Not because I intended to do anything improper with it, because I intended to remediate properly, and remediation requires accurate records. But it also meant that every item Tiffert had been quietly hoping would stay buried was now formally on paper, in files that belonged to a company that was no longer his. Liam didn't know any of this yet. He came to my place that evening, and we sat in the kitchen the way we've always sat. Him at the end of the table where he used to do homework, me across from him with coffee, and I let him talk. He talked for a long time, about feeling stupid for trusting it, about wondering if he'd been naive, taking the job in the first place, trying to build something with people who'd never actually wanted him there, about Stephanie, and how she was caught between 2 families, and how that wasn't fair to her, and how he didn't want this to become her fault. I listened. I didn't interrupt it. When he was done, I said, "You're not stupid. You're just honest, and honest people who keep getting surprised by dishonest ones. That's not a flaw. That's just how it goes until it stops." He looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means give me a few days." He didn't push. He knows me well enough to know that when I say a few days, I mean I have already been working on it. What happened next unfolded slowly, the way most real consequences do. Not in a dramatic confrontation, not in a single moment, but in a series of small, unignorable realities that accumulated until there was no explaining them away. The first was a letter from Dominique, sent to Hart Properties legal counsel, outlining Liam's wrongful dismissal claim. 12 months visible notice, given the specialized nature of the role, the manner of termination, and the documented internal reporting history. The letter was professional and detailed, and made clear that the matter would proceed to the Ontario Labour Relations Board if not resolved within 30 days. I was told, through channels, that Clifford's first reaction was dismissal. The irony of that word is not lost on me. He apparently said something to the effect that they'd let a lawyer handle it and it would go nowhere. His lawyer, however, had a different read. His lawyer, I was later informed, spent 2 hours explaining to Clifford what 12 months of a specialized operations manager's salary looked like as a damages award, plus legal cost, plus the tribunal's general tendency to look unfavorably on dismisses with the kind of optics this one had. Clifford came back with an offer. 6 weeks on top of the statutory minimum. Dominique declined and held at 12 months. That was the week the property manager sent the formal remediation notices to the existing tenants of the Mississauga Plaza, required under the purchase agreement and required under the city's bylaw timeline. The notices detailed the work that would be done, the schedule, and the temporary operational adjustments tenants should anticipate. They were sent on Bergeron Holdings letterhead, a name I'd used for exactly one other project, a small commercial renovation in Sudbury 8 years ago, and which meant nothing to anyone in the GTA. Nothing, that is, until Clifford's leasing manager pulled the purchase records and cross-referenced the corporate registry. I was later told the call Clifford made to his lawyer that afternoon lasted 40 minutes. The settlement offer on Liam's wrongful dismissal came through the following day, for 12 months, plus costs. No admission which Dominic had expected, but the number was right. Liam called me when his lawyer, Dominic had referred him to a colleague who handled employment specifically, confirmed the offer. He was quiet again, but a different quiet. He said, "Dad, Stephanie's father is saying you bought his properties." "Some of them," I said. A pause. "Did you know when you bought them?" "I knew what I was buying," I said. "I did my due diligence properly." Another pause. Longer. Then, "He's saying you did this on purpose." "I made a legitimate offer on a distressed portfolio," I said. "He accepted it. That's a transaction, Liam. It's not personal." Liam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with something that sounded almost like reluctant admiration, "He didn't know it was you, did he?" "No." "When did he find out?" "When the letterhead went out to tenants." Liam made a sound. Not quite a laugh. "Something more complicated than that. I want to be careful here about what I'm saying and what I'm not. I did not buy those properties to punish Clifford Hart. I bought them because they were a sound investment at the right price. With the remediation plan I had the capacity to execute. The fact that Clifford had spent 14 months dismissing my son while simultaneously running a property portfolio in deteriorating condition and then sold that portfolio to the father he'd insulted, that is not a plan I designed. That is, I would argue, simply consequence finding its level. What I did design was the due diligence, the patience, the willingness to say nothing at that dinner table except a smile. Because I already knew what I knew, and I knew that what I knew was sufficient. The conversation with Clifford happened 3 weeks later. Stephanie had asked quietly if the two of us would meet. Not to fight, she said. She was exhausted by the fighting. She just wanted her husband and her father to exist in the same world without the whole thing collapsing. We met at a coffee shop in Burlington, neutral ground, Stephanie's suggestion, which showed good sense. Clifford was already there when I arrived. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which I recognized, because I know what carrying financial stress looks like on a person's face. I've worn that face myself 22 years ago, when the consultancy nearly didn't survive a bad contract in Northern Ontario. It ages you around the eyes. I sat down. I ordered a coffee. I waited. He said eventually, "You should have told me who you were." "You didn't ask," I said. "You made an offer evaluation. You did your review. You accepted. That's how transactions work. You knew my situation." "I knew the portfolio situation," I said. "That's what I was buying?" He was quiet for a moment. I could see him deciding which version of this conversation he wanted to have, the angry one or the one where he preserved some dignity. I genuinely didn't know which he'd choose. He chose, to his credit, the second one. He said I wasn't fair to your son. I looked at him. I didn't say anything. I had ideas about what I thought Stephanie deserved, who I thought she should be with. Those ideas were. He stopped, started again. I was wrong about him. I picked up my coffee. Liam works hard. He's honest. He catches problems before they become problems. I paused. Those are qualities worth more than most people realize until they don't have them. Clifford nodded slowly. We didn't hug. We didn't become friends. There was no scene from a movie where old men weep and reconcile over shared regret. What there was a conversation between two people who understood each other better than they had before and who both loved the same young woman enough to try. Liam and Stephanie are doing well. He's working with me now, not because I arranged it, but because he asked, and because he's good, and because I have a remediation project in Mississauga that needs someone organized and thorough who will catch problems 3 steps early. He jokes sometimes that he's the only person in the GTA who got fired by his father-in-law and then became his landlord's son. I don't correct him. The joke is close enough. Last November, Clifford came to our family Thanksgiving. He sat at the end of the table opposite me, and he was quieter than he usually is. And at one point, my grandson, Stephanie and Liam's boy, 4 years old and named after no one, because Liam and Stephanie wanted him to be entirely his own person, climbed into Clifford's lap and fell asleep between the stuffing and the pie. I watched Clifford's face when that happened. The way it changed. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain, where a man used money and leverage to humiliate someone who'd wronged his family and dressed it up as due diligence. I've thought about that version. I don't think it's the true one, but I hold it honestly because I'm 67 years old and I've made enough mistakes to know that the line between justice and spite is one you have to draw yourself, and drawing it requires more honesty than most people are comfortable with. What I know is this. I did not manufacture a crisis for Clifford Hurt. I found one that already existed. I paid a fair price for assets in genuine distress, and I am making those assets better. I got my son the settlement he was owed under the law. I did not lie to anyone. I did not threaten anyone. I did not say a single word at that dinner table in Oakville that I regret. I smiled. And I waited. And in my experience, 67 years of it to a marriage that made me better, and a loss that nearly broke me, and a business built on the understanding that you don't get the second contract unless you do the first one right. Patience is not a passive thing. It's the most deliberate choice a person can make. The bench in Bryant Park is in New York. We don't have a Bryant Park here. But there's a bench along the Rideau River where I used to take Liam when he was small, before his mother got sick, before any of this. We'd feed the ducks and talk about nothing in particular. What kind of engineer he might be someday. Whether the Sens would ever have a good season. Which constellations you could actually see from Ottawa in February. If you were patient enough to wait for a clear night. I took my grandson there this past spring. We fed the ducks. He asked me if fish could fly in. I told him not exactly, but some of them jumped pretty high if they wanted to. He thought about that for a long time. Then he said, "Grandpa, why do ducks float?" And I thought, that right there, that question from a 4-year-old on a bench in Ottawa in April. That is what Clifford Hart tried to take from my family. Not the money, not the standing. This, the afternoon, the river, the ducks. He didn't get it. I made sure of that. There's a moment at that Burlington coffee shop I keep coming back to. Not the part where Clifford admitted he'd been wrong about Liam, though that mattered. The part just before it, when he was sitting there deciding which version of himself to be. I watched that happen in real time. And I thought that's the whole thing, right there. Every consequence a person lives with starts in exactly that kind of moment. What Clifford built over 30 years wasn't brought down by me. It was brought down by the slow accumulation of choices he made when he thought no one was paying attention. The deferred repairs, the maintenance records he buried, the dismissal letter left on a car seat. None of those things happened because he was unusually crude. They happened because he'd stopped asking whether what he was doing was right and started only asking whether he could get away with it. That's a quieter kind of failure than most people recognize. But it's the one that tends to cost the most in the end. I think about what I want Liam to take from this. Not the transaction, not the numbered company or the letterhead or the settlement figure. Those are details. What I want him to carry is the understanding that the way you do the work is the work. He flagged those maintenance problems in writing twice when he could have ignored them. He did that because it was the honest thing to do, not because he thought anyone was watching. That's the thing I tried to give him growing up, and the thing I was most relieved to see he'd actually kept. I'm not a patient man by nature. People who know me well would laugh at the idea. But I've learned, slowly, expensively, through mistakes I won't bore you with, that there's a difference between patience and passivity. Patience is active. It means you've assessed the situation clearly. You know what you know and you've decided that the right moment to act hasn't arrived yet. Passivity is just hoping it works out. I have never been able to afford hope as a strategy. What I've relied on instead is the discipline to do the work correctly and then wait for that to mean something. Clifford had the resources to do things right. He had the capital, the time, the experience. What he lacked was the willingness to be honest about what his portfolio actually needed and the integrity to treat the people around him as something other than instruments. Those aren't complicated virtues. They don't require wealth or education or connections. They require the decision, made repeatedly, to be the kind of person who does things properly even when it's inconvenient. My grandson asked me why ducks float. I told him it had to do with the way they're built, that nature gives certain things exactly what they need to stay above the water. He thought about that for a long time before he moved on to the next question. I thought about it longer than he did. Some people stay afloat because of what they've accumulated, others because of how they're built. I know which one lasts. I've known for a long time. I just had to wait for Clifford to find out for himself.